Yay! Yeah, this one's loosey goosey.
Amazing. It's a no rules podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Required Reading, the podcast that revisits the most impactful books from our childhood. But this week, it's Christmas. I'm your host, Erin Bowles. I'm a writer, actor, and comedian, and it's the end of the year, so I'm a little loopy. Our guest today is Carly O'Brien, and unless I'm wrong, and it's my podcast, so no one can correct me, you're our first three-peat guest. Hello!
Hi, what a true Christmas miracle honor.
Oh my gosh, wait, totally forgot. So, like, at the beginning of the month, before I had a real hard look at my finances, I went to Michael's and I got some stuff. So, here's a little gingerbread soldier, but he looks like he's made of gingerbread.
Wow. Wow.
And then here's Santa with a sleigh, but his like fur trim is sprinkles.
What a delight. Christmas time really is a magic time.
It is. Oh my gosh. Our book today, correct me if I'm wrong, I'd never read this. You'd never read this, right?
I've never read this. Yeah.
A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This was my first Dickens.
I think it was my first Dickens too. Yeah, I don't think I ever read what else. I mean, Great Expectations, all the other stuff that he wrote. I don't think I ever had to read that for
Yeah,
school or anything. Yeah, what a
exactly.
wonderful
That was,
introduction to his work.
yeah. And really, I feel like anytime I think about Dickens, I do feel like it's, 1,000-page novels. And this is a tight little novella. Before this, what was your familiarity with A Christmas Carol, with the story? We texted about Muppets.
We did. Of course, we texted about Muppets. And of course, Christmas time, Muppets are always in my brain because I grew up watching the Muppet Family Christmas, which is
Mhm.
wonderful. And it you can find it in its entirety on YouTube. And also, we watched John Denver and the Muppets, which was another very, very important. My parents both loved John Denver.
How can you
And
not?
there's a Muppet special with him, and that can also be found in its entirety on YouTube. So actually within the last week, I've watched both of those. But actually our family wasn't as much a Muppet Christmas Carol family, but we were a Mickey's Christmas Carol family. We did
Mm.
watch Mickey's Christmas Carol with a classic Scrooge McDuck, and the door knocker becomes Goofy's goofy face with the long nose and the whole thing. So when I think about the door knocker, I'm picturing Goofy, a blue Goofy, looking as scary as Goofy can look. So that was ours. And also, my mom loved the George C. Scott Christmas
Okay.
Carol. We watched that one yearly. And then she also we did I remember watching the Patrick, oh come on, Sir Patrick Stewart, the Sir Patrick Stewart as well.
Mm. Yeah.
Steeped in A Christmas Carol from a young age.
Man, I think for as much of a Muppet family as I am from, I don't think I ever sat down and watched all of A Muppet Christmas Carol until the last couple of years, which is surprising. I feel like maybe like Muppets in my family were mostly Sesame Street, which is still counts. Fully 100% counts. Bear in the Big Blue
Hmm.
House, which all
Yes.
makes sense because I was a child. Yeah, I didn't even finish it. I only watched Muppet Treasure Island a couple months ago, and I didn't even finish
Mm,
it. I don't even
wow.
know why. I think I was just like, there's a limited amount of Tim Curry in this world, and I need to save it. He's still
Yeah.
alive. What am I doing?
And I'll say also, while we're talking about Christmas,
Yeah.
one of the comfort movies that my wife and I watch 12 months out of the year is going to be Home Alone, and then Home Alone 2, which
Mhm.
also features a wonderful Tim Curry character. I love that you mentioned Sesame Street too, because what I love about, okay, eventually we'll stop talking about Muppets, but Muppets are here. Muppets
No.
are like, it's all connected. But a
Hmm.
Muppet Family Christmas, the premise is, I don't even talk about it. The premise is Fozzie's mom is going to be all alone on Christmas. And so Fozzie, to surprise her, brings all of his friends to her house. And then it cuts to her, and she's like, I'm so excited. She's wearing like some sunglasses, and she's like, I can't wait to get to Florida for Christmas. I'm going to spend my Christmas in Florida. And then like all these Muppets show up, and then she has to like entertain all these Muppets. But those Muppets show up, and then all the Sesame Street Muppets come around and carol. So it's like Big
Oh
Bird
my
is there,
gosh.
Grover is there, Elmo is there, everyone's there. And then they go and they find a little Fraggle hole. And so there's like a little Fraggle. So
Wow.
it's like most of the Muppet families come together. So it's like a Muppet Family Christmas. Anyway, it's wonderful. All of the
What?
things Venn diagram together. Oh yeah, and Jim Henson has a little cameo in
Oh,
it as
Jim.
well. I
I have
know,
to
it's
say
great.
this. Jim Henson went to University of Maryland. I'm from Maryland. They have a statue of him on a bench, and he's got the Kermit puppet.
Uh,
There's a creepy because the University of Maryland mascot is a terrapin, which is a kind of turtle. So there's a very creepy statue where they like it's kind of Kermit but kind of a terrapin. It's on my Instagram from a couple months ago because Zach and I went. But actually, I realized while you're saying that the true Muppet movie that I was most familiar with was Muppets from Space, which has, I think, our family was most familiar with because the soundtrack is so bumpin'.
okay, I
Yeah.
need to watch that one because I actually have never seen a Muppet Treasure Island. Did I just say a
Yeah.
Muppet Treasure Island? Jesus. A Christmas
Um,
Carol. A Muppet.
there could be many,
Muppet.
yes.
Hmm.
So actually, let's talk a little bit about. Last night was my boyfriend's office Christmas party. So we were there, we were having fun. I had just done research for this episode. In the Victorian era, the, English reign of Queen Victoria, they really like repopularized Christmas in a way that they hadn't before, and this novel was a huge part of it. So I was talking to my boyfriend yesterday at this party. We were bowling, and I was like, "Do you want to guess when the first commercially available Christmas cards came out?" And he went, 1843." And I went, "How the hell did you do that?" Because yes, it was 1843, the year this novel came
Wow.
out. The first commercially available Christmas cards came out. Some other things that happened this year, mostly US centered because that's where we are. The first major Oregon Trail wagon train set out with 1,000 pioneers. Joseph Smith, founder of the Latter-day Saints movement, allegedly receives a revelation recommending polygamy. July 12th.
Hmm.
Write it down in your calendar. And
Incredible.
Hawaii is recognized as an independent nation by the UK and France. RIP. So, Charles Dickens was about 32 when this came out. He's born in a middle class family, but his father spends too much, ends up in debt. He goes into a debtor's prison while Charles is 12. And as was typical at the time, allegedly, his wife and all of his children younger than Charles go to live with him in jail. And so
Oh wow.
Charles, yeah, has to go to work. He works in a rat-infested shoe polish factory, and his job is putting the labels on. It really shapes how he looks at the world. It's the Industrial Revolution. This is really bad. And he starts writing A Christmas Carol in October of 1843. He writes it in 6 weeks, super
Wow.
fast. He, quote, built much of the work into his head while taking nighttime walks of 15 to 20 miles.
Jeez, Louise.
Absolutely wild. And it
Wow.
is published on the 19th of December. By the 24th, it is sold out. They order a second edition and a third edition before New Year's. It is seen as a new gospel, an automatic success. Gentleman's Magazine says that there's a rise of charitable giving in Britain because of this. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but sure. It's sort of like a countryside thing, and this is with Dickens and with this novel, it's like really starting to be an urban holiday, and it can be celebrated sort of despite the modernization. Victoria and Albert popularized like the Christmas tree and put it in the
Hmm.
palace. And he sort of really praised, like, again, a humanitarian focus of the holiday. So, family gatherings and seasonal food and drink. And he linked it with sort of like, quote, a context of social reconciliation.
Mm.
And let me see what else. So when he's a kid, his grandmother then dies, and so there's a little bit of a windfall. His family leaves prison, but his mom is like, "Wait, maybe he should continue to have this job in the rat-infested factory," and that
Mm.
seems to really put a little bit of a misogynist slant in Charles to be like,
Mm,
that's not your job to think about money, mama, because you traumatized me,
mm.
which makes sense, but not good. So then he goes back to school. He works at a law office. He spends 3 years going to the theater every single night. He's obsessed with theater. He's briefly a freelance journalist, and then he starts writing these like serialized stories called the Pickwick Papers that become his first novel. People talk about this novel as if like Dickens was Prometheus giving humans fire. Quote, the most important single novel of the Victorian age. Quote, literature is not a big enough category for Pickwick. It defined its own, a new
Wow.
one that we have learned to call entertainment. And there's spin-offs and merchandise and Pickwick cigars and playing cards and puzzles and even boot polish. Full circle. This is sort of like coming off of the success of Pickwick. And then I'm going to send you two pictures of what Scrooge was allegedly based on. So there's
Okay.
John
God.
Elwes and Jemmy Wood, and these paintings. They
Oh, wow. Okay.
look like Muppets. Yeah.
They do look like Muppets. There's this John Elwes one. His head just juts forward in such a, and of course these aren't photographs.
Yeah.
Of course these are paintings. But it's
Mm,
almost like it's a
yeah.
like it's a caricature. Interesting. So he's like a
Yeah.
thin man that is mostly forehead.
Yeah. And
And
the front of his face is fully pushed like a foot forward from the rest of him.
yes, got some long hair. Okay, he looks miserly. And then Jimmy Wood looks
Hmm.
like a delightful but sinister little man. It
Yes.
looks like he could be very jovial, but it also kind of
Hmm.
looks, I don't know, there's a knowing look in his eye where he's like, I'm
Yes.
ready to oppress some poor people.
Yes. He's about to say something really funny and then also tell you that he just bought your home or something and that you're homeless now.
Mhm.
You
Yeah, yeah,
know,
yeah.
that's who he, and that seems to be, I mean, that's the basis for Scrooge. I mean,
Mm,
if you are unfamiliar with A Christmas Carol, frankly shocking. But it's about a miserly banker who is visited by three ghosts, and he decides to be nice again and celebrate the
mm.
true meaning of Christmas. How did you feel about this little book?
We could probably do some sort of analysis on which of the film adaptations of A Christmas Carol
Mhm.
gets closer to the book. And I think we would be shocked to find that the Muppets do a really great job. I mean, as far as
They have a
I'm
lot of
concerned,
direct quotes, yeah.
yes. And I think that they're the only ones who choose to have like a narrator. And this is a book that
Mhm.
isn't told from Scrooge's point of view. It's told by this like omniscient narrator. And so having Gonzo and Rizzo be our
Yeah.
narrators was very, very brilliant. And another really great way to get a lot of these kind of quotes in, which I found really interesting. Um, I mean, and something to know about me, which you already know this, but I have always been like a highly sensitive, highly emotional person. I just feel things very strongly. I'm not
Yeah.
like other girls. So, like from the first moment that I read this book, I was like, this book is going to make me cry
Mm.
because it's like a redemption arc. I think is one of the most moving things to me, even though who's being redeemed, like the person who's being redeemed, is like exactly the villain in all of capitalism. Like, and so, it's, I don't know, it feels far enough away that I still get to enjoy that redemption
Mm.
arc, but it also feels incredibly close
It feels
at the same
very
time.
current. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And it really did succeed in, you can't understand the fullness of the redemption until you understand how evil this person is.
Mm. Yeah.
And the things that I have not seen in any of the adaptations that I have seen are really just, Charles Dickens paints such a clear picture of who this person is from jump, and that there are no redeeming qualities in him. And that is so that the reversal is even more satisfying. And it was very, very satisfying. I also realized how many things are left out of most of the film adaptations, like some surprising things that were kind of left out that I found profoundly moving. There was the part where after Scrooge gets visited by Marley, Marley is like, I'm actually kind of surprised that you can see me because this is not my first time. Like sometimes I like sit next to you.
Yeah.
And so it's wild that you can see me right now. It's like there's been some kind of like tear in this interdimensional world. And because of that tear, after he leaves, Scrooge looks out the window and sees all of these chain
Yeah.
clad spirits who can't interfere. He sees one of them trying to interfere in someone who needs help and he can't. And that's the lesson. I mean, that's so much of the lesson, I think, is that these people who are now ghosts, who are now chained by the decisions that they made in life, are now completely unable. The irony being, they're completely unable
Mhm.
to change anything that's happening. And they had the chance to change it then. So it's just this constant reminder for them of the ways that they fucked up in life. And now they can't fix anything in death in
Yeah.
this like ghostly realm. So I was like, I remember I read that out loud to Heather. I was just like, listen to this. Like they never, and I get it. Like it's a lot to cram in to a movie that children are probably going to watch. So right, we have to cut some things from the source material. I get, but I just found that to be really profoundly just like kind of a reframing of something that I already understood. Right, these chains are of my own making, and I wasn't kind enough, and this can happen to you. But just like he looks out the window and he sees all these spirits who their curse is that they can't interfere. And they
Yeah.
didn't interfere when they had a chance. So I found that really, really, really moving.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that I think I found it a little I think so often in this podcast, I'll come in and then feel differently about the book by the end of the recording because I think I had an issue with this book that I think I had with the very first time I read Pride and Prejudice when I was in high school, which was that I was so familiar with the afterwork, with the adaptations and things like that, that the original felt like a copy of things I already knew. This felt a little simplistic. It felt a little hollow. I think that change that you said, the contrast is so stark, but it also felt kind of sudden to me. I felt a very similar way that I did with Huck Finn of like, be a good person is the moral. Like, is that it? And when I recorded my Huck Finn episode, my guest was like, yeah, sometimes, yeah. So like, at least with Huck Finn, it's like the moral is black people are people too. And my guest was like, yeah, this is like
Mm-hmm.
1860. That's still a lesson we have to learn. I was left wanting more. I think like I wanted
Mm,
more of Scrooge's story. I want a little bit more time with those ghosts and seeing what others what sort of what else this world looks like. But yeah, I was really struck. Ghost of Christmas Past, they go to his school days, and I really, really wanted more of that to get where
yeah.
to see how Scrooge gets where he is because he is so I mean the dialogue that they give him in those first few scenes is like horrifying. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the film. I was watching some of Muppet Christmas Carol this morning, but there is like well the poor are dying in the streets. It's like, well, aren't there prisons to put them in? They should die and, rid ourselves of the burden of the excess population. It's kind of disheartening when things
Yeah.
written almost 200 years ago are still so current. Although one detail I will love doesn't come through in a lot of the film adaptations is that Bob Cratchit walks around in a comforter because it's so dang cold out. I really loved
Yeah.
that.
That is really nice. Yes, truly. Truly. And I think too, you're so right that it is very, very simplistic in its moral. And I mean it's a parable, right? Like it's an allegory, it's all those things. So in that way it is kind of inherently not completely realistic.
Mhm. Yeah.
Especially to cram it into however many 123 pages
Yeah.
mine
Yeah.
is. But his change of heart is contingent upon his wanting to see more, you know?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't believe in Jacob Marley until Jacob Marley makes it abundantly clear that what is happening is real, that he is real. And it's not until Scrooge kind of submits himself to that, he willingly suspends his disbelief and he
Mhm.
like then believes in the ghost and then will listen to what the ghost says. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be amazing if, and
Yeah.
like this time of year, it's always we see like the viral tweets that are like, oh, if only CEOs could be visited by blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, CEOs can be visited by spirits of
Mhm.
whatever, whatever it is that keeps them up at night, if anything keeps them up at night. But it's only effective if those people are willing to
Yeah.
listen and willing to see
Yeah.
more. And so I think that's the thing that kind of becomes unrealistic, because if we know anything about these kinds of people, it's that there's going to be nothing but doubling, tripling down on, no, what
Yeah.
I'm doing is like is actually okay. And the only reason, I mean, the thing that's the most moving for him is seeing Tiny Tim, seeing this real life
Right.
example of he is not providing his employee enough to be able to support a family without a disabled child, but with a child who has a lot of health problems.
Yeah.
And unless he starts to provide more for that family, like this thing is going to happen.
Right.
But you can't manufacture empathy. And
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe that's like a pessimistic view of things,
Yeah.
but he has to believe the ghosts, and he has to believe that these things are going to be worth his time. I mean, the ghosts are going to visit him no matter what, and they're going to
Right.
take him to these places and show him these things no matter what. But I just feel like IRL, I don't know, anything can happen. Anyone can change,
Hmm.
and I have to think about that all the time because I changed so much. Like I grew up in this extremely conservative family world, and it wasn't until I was ready to leave that behind. It wasn't until
Yeah.
that wasn't enough for me anymore that things really started to change for me. But still, I have this conversation with people all the time that I'm just like, yeah, like there are members of my family that are like never going to change. And people are
Yeah.
like, well, you never know. And I'm like, yeah, but I know that they're stubborn. But then I have to think, if I can change, but I want it to
Mhm.
change, you know?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that that might be overly simplistic and idealistic, but also I am an optimist. And I think for better or for worse, I try to be a realist and I try to be an optimist. But so yeah, it's great that Scrooge was able to change. It's
Yeah.
great that something got through to him. Yeah, it just makes me immediately wonder, what is it that's going to be the thing that's going to get through to this
Yeah.
person or to this person or to this person.
Yeah. Why does Tiny Tim change him? In terms of the ghost strategy, right? I think it's really good to start with Ghost of Christmas Past. Let's look at your childhood, Scrooge. Let's pull it to you. And I think like the childhood is not that bad almost, right? I think it's the emotional hit there is that he has this woman leave him, right? He wants to marry this girl, but she says you're more interested in money than me.
He's
But there's
changed. Something has changed along the way, because like you used to be okay with us living simply, and
right.
the more the power and money, yeah, it's
Hmm.
corrupted you, and now you're different.
Right. And I think you said this question as well, but yeah, what are those conditions that create change? What has to be there in order to be willing to see more and to see the differences? And yeah, is it because that Tiny Tim has a face, because he knows Bob Cratchit, because he knows this family, because he knows that if he wanted to, he could change this specific child's life? Some of the writing is so, I mean, the very first paragraph right now is going viral on TikTok. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. But there's also at the end, there's a line it's like even in all caps in my copy that's like, I have an ebook that's like, and Tiny Tim did not die. That was not in the original printing. I think someone went back later and said, let's make this really clear. Did not die, which I
Yeah.
appreciate. I was surprised by how funny it is. There's this great just the writing. I mean, obviously, like Dickens is an incredible celebrated writer, so here's
Hmm.
the reason: squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Fantastic. The line that really made me be like, oh, this actually is a great text for the Muppets is Scrooge's nephew comes in, says a whole big thing about, well, actually, let's celebrate Christmas, and Christmas is great. And Bob Cratchit just starts clapping alone in silence.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's so Kermit. Oh my gosh. Incredible.
Perfect casting. No notes.
And this is, I think, the biggest number one source for the cultural phrase humbug. I think number two is
Hmm.
Wizard of Oz, which comes about 55 years later, which makes more sense in Wizard of Oz, as a humbug is a fool, a sham. And here I don't really get it.
Hmm.
But words can have multiple meanings. That's fine.
Yeah, I guess if they have to, it would be easier if they didn't.
I want to know more about the relationship between Scrooge and Marley, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I I I don't really know because I feel like it's maybe part of the reason why Scrooge changes is that it is broached by like a mirror of himself, someone who is like, I have
Mm-hmm.
the same beliefs. We were business partners because we agree so well on this. And here's what
Yeah.
I'm living through. Yeah.
Yeah. And someone that he probably, I mean, by all accounts, for what we read, the information that we have in the text is that when you work closely with someone, there's probably, especially when you have any amount of power, like there's a
Yeah.
reason why, like, you know, Scrooge didn't fire Marley because they didn't get along. There had to have been some kind of like, they probably liked each other and they probably were around
Yeah.
like the same kind of person. And you know, like maybe there was some kind, and this is just all extrapolating from what we have in the text, but they probably respected each other and respected
Yeah.
the way that they ran their business, and they agreed on the way that they ran their business. I mean, to see someone that has died is one thing, even though it might be a bit of undigested beef, he says. It might just be like a
Classic.
dream or some sort of indigestion that he is experiencing, which is another way that Charles Dickens, what a funny guy. He's so funny. This book was very, very, very funny and very enjoyable to read.
Uh,
Who knows how close they were. But I agree that I wish that there was more of an understanding of these men's relationship. And also just like sidebar, but I promise I'll get back to it. As a theater person, my relationship with the Christmas Carol is
mhm.
I mean, my relationship with Christmas is fraught, but my relationship with A Christmas Carol is like this is the play that theater companies put on because they know it's a classic. It'll get butts and seats. It'll sell tickets, and so people are old like theater companies around this time of the year, around like Halloween, Thanksgiving, Halloween,
Mhm.
early November. They're starting to put on A Christmas Carol. And oftentimes they're doing it to keep themselves afloat for the whole year, right? They're kind of giving
Right.
themselves a
Mhm.
little bit of a cushion because they know it'll sell. They know that families are going to come to it. They know that it's family friendly. And so theater companies are always putting it in on all the time, forever and ever, amen. And I was in a production of, there's a play, and it's at my office. Otherwise, I would have looked at it again. But there's a play called Jacob Marley's Christmas Carol that I was in 15 years ago here in Oklahoma City, and it was kind of looking at things from Jacob Marley's perspective. It was kind of just a recontextualizing of the classic story
Yeah.
that we know through the eyes of Jacob Marley. Yeah, so that might be worth checking out. Like I said, I wish I remembered more about it, but it's like a four-person play, and I played this.
Mhm.
The character's name was like the Bogle, Bogle, but I think they made me
Classic.
say it as the Boggle, even though Bogle. Bogle. Anyway, and I played kind of this like spirit who I was kind of like this like sprite, this like fairy type thing. That was kind of going between Scrooge and Jacob Marley and all these other characters that were being played. And then I would play different characters depending on because it was only a four-person cast. Fascinating, really fascinating stuff. But yeah, that might shed, I wish I had more to say about it,
Yeah.
but that might shed a little bit more light. I mean, it's obviously like this playwright has said, we've heard it from this perspective, let's hear it from this other perspective, in
Right.
hopes to maybe like fill some of those like dramaturgical
Yeah.
holes. Because the fact is there is something about that relationship and the way that Jacob Marley shows up and
Mhm.
the surprising things he has to say. And he takes that thing off of his head, and the jaw falls down, which
Mhm.
I will say, I think I've seen one film adaptation that does that, that actually he takes
Yeah.
the thing off and like his jaw falls down, his jaw falls open in a way that
Mhm.
terrifies Scrooge.
Yeah.
But of course, it's canon that he's wearing the little thing, but no one
Right.
knows why. And I didn't really understand why until I saw this or until I read this, and then was like, oh yeah, I think that one adaptation tried to do that.
Yeah.
But it's canon that I always just thought as a kid, like, does Jacob Marley have a toothache or something?
Exactly, because
But
that's what it looks like.
yeah, yeah, but it's that his jaw is like unhinged. And then he like
Yeah.
ties it all back up nice and neat. I wish I remembered which film adaptation does show that.
Yeah.
But
Because in the
also we have
Muppets, go for it.
yeah, no, tell me about the Muppets.
Well, it's the two of them. I can never remember their real names, but they named one Jacob and they named the other Robert.
Right.
Bob.
Yeah, it was Statler and Waldorf.
Sutler and Waldorf, thank
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
he's living in Marley's house. Like these like they're
Yeah.
and I think a lot of it is like unchanged. Like most of it is Marley's furniture and like I want to know more about it, you know?
Definitely. And I mean, just the iconic Marley was dead to begin with, and the
Mhm.
adaptation with the Muppets, the Marleys were dead to begin with. Even just the first line is so evocative. It's so
Yeah.
did you ever see there's the Margaret Atwood masterclass that was being advertised, and the little
Okay.
teaser to her masterclass was she was like, you're like the first line is really important, blah blah blah. You could say that something, or you could say it was dark in the belly of the wolf or whatever, like
Hmm.
as your first line. So that is giving that same, like, in theater we call it like a forward. It like makes
Hmm.
the audience look forward to, like, wait, what does that mean? I can't wait to find out what that means later.
Yeah.
So it like automatically grabs you. And then I mean, Marley is the first word
Yeah.
in the book, you know, so he is this really important character. So yeah, I totally agree with you that I wish we could know a little more about their relationship,
Yeah.
or the amount of respect we can infer, right? We can infer, we can
Hmm.
assume from what we read, but yeah, I
Yeah.
wish that was
I wanted
fleshed out a little more.
to read the preface so fast of I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of the humor with themselves, with each other, and with the season, or me. May it haunt their house pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, CD.
Hmm.
A little
Yeah,
ghost
yeah,
story.
just a little creepy ghost story, and maybe that's what all the viral tweets going around. There'll be scary ghost stories, not
Hmm.
understanding where that line in the Christmas Carol comes from. And I also think that the significance of a Christmas Carol instead of the Christmas Carol,
Hmm. Yeah.
and the mention of that in the book is when Scrooge is like, "Yeah, I remembered that there was a Christmas Carol being sung through my keyhole at the office." Just like the message of all of that
Yeah.
that he didn't
Yeah.
listen to then.
Yeah. Dickens has this experience working in a factory. He writes this right after coming off a big trip to the US. And
Mm,
it's sort of like it's gonna be easier instead of hitting someone on the head with like be good to your workers. It's a lot easier to say, here's a fun little Christmas ghost story and to slide in these ideas and these messages, even though it's not really slid in. It's pretty someone is coming and saying, be better, but it's effective, you know. I'm even looking at a line right now. Your lip is trembling, said the ghost, and what is that upon your cheek? Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would.
the pimple, leave
Okay.
me alone. Yeah, I did a good job of like taking some notes at the
Yeah,
beginning.
me too. And then as I was reading, it fell off a little bit.
No, definitely. Because then I was just like, at that point, I was kind of just looking for ways that what's written on the page differs from what's in
Mm.
like the canon, like what I remember from any of the versions of this, the adaptations that I've seen. And my I got the Puffin Classic, which had
Nice.
a an introduction by Anthony Horowitz maybe. And this is what he says. He says, there have been many film and television versions of A Christmas Carol, parentheses, my own favorite, I'm afraid, was the one with the Muppets, in parentheses.
Good.
But none of them have quite captured the energy and the passion of the book itself. So first of all, Tony, why are you ashamed? You're afraid that your own favorite version is the Muppets. It's a perfect version. So
Here,
don't don't discredit
there's
my
a
Muppets.
There's a quote I have highlighted here from the book itself to quote back to him. You fear the world too much. Be the Muppets. You know?
Yeah, embrace the Muppets, my dude. But there were just so many things, like something that I noticed too. Let me see if I can find um this quote. And this is literally on page 2, right? It's talking about Marley's ghost, blah 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 blah. And it says there's just this parallel between Scrooge and Marley that I think is set up really well, which is that, you know, Scrooge never pays the money to paint out Marley's name from the sign,
Right.
and that he even answers to Marley's name. Like the two of them are like one and the
Mm.
same. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. So nice job, Chuck, putting that in there. Just clearly like paralleling the two of these men. But there's this whole section about that essentially is just problematic people don't age well and unproblematic people age well. which is,
Mm,
something that we think about all the time, kind of in this, or I think about that all the time too. If I'm looking at someone who has like done a lot of evil things, I'm like, that person has not aged well because they're holding hatred and meanness in their heart. And I'm like, cool, Chuck agrees. Chuck is Charles Dickens.
yeah.
Charles Dickens totally agrees with me, which I really like. And even the blind man's dogs appeared to know Scrooge. And
Yes.
when they saw him, they would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then they would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye."
Mm.
That he's just giving this,
Ugh.
giving this like energy off. That's just really
Yeah.
gross.
Yeah, I'm looking at the conversation he has with his, I guess it's his fiance. I don't think she has a name. But this is the, "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your
Mm,
nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you." Yeah, I think it's
yeah.
just like it's there. I want more of it. Take 10 weeks instead of 6 weeks. But then the Christmas deadline passes. We got to get it to the printer. Those real world
Right,
circumstances come and press in.
right. Is gain a capital G?
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I also noticed that throughout too
Yeah.
these, which once again, it's like lest we forget, this is an allegory. It's a parable. It's
Yeah.
This is the whole idea of avarice, of abundance. Because I noticed that want and abundance were both
Hmm.
whenever they were talked about early in the book. And then obviously there's the
Yes. Who
children
are want and
under the
need.
robe.
Right.
It's want and oh come on, I should know it. My mom would be so disappointed to know that I don't know it off the top of my head. Because that was one of her favorite parts of it was when he
Mm,
like reveals that these are the embodiments of
yeah.
these are things that can be fixed. Like these children are
Right.
wanting of whatever it is, food, clothing, shelter, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're wanting of that, and that isn't something
Yeah.
that can't be fixed. Like that
Yeah.
is something that we can do something about, but I'll never find out which ghost is this. And usually that was the part in the book or in the movie that really freaked me out because normally like people
Mm.
make those children look rough to like drive that point home. And then the same thing with like the third ghost was always very, very terrifying because it was like a skeletal hand um
Yeah.
peeking
It's
out
I think in the
under.
Muppets it's the Grim Reaper, right?
Yeah, I think so. Okay,
I
where are we?
love the Muppet Ghost of Christmas Present. I love the way that first line of "Come in and no be better, man." I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
he's joy. He's just joy
Hmm.
personified. And he's like going through and he's like waving his little magic wand or whatever he has to here have some Christmas cheer, have some Christmas spirit, have some Christmas joy. And then it's the same guy that's like, look upon these children,
Yeah.
uh ignorance and want. That's what it is.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Ignorance and want. Beware them both and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy. The boy is ignorance. For on his brow I see written, which is doom, unless the writing be
Mm.
erased. Are there no prisons? And he quotes this stuff back to him. He's set
Yeah.
up as just this big, like, hey, like excess. Like, let's eat all the apples and all the grapes and all the
Right.
whatever. Like, all of this can, like, is yours. Here it is. Take it. But also he is the one who's like, hey, this is like what you're trying to keep from, it's this excess, and this is the excess that you enjoy, and this is what you're like keeping from people. Are there no prisons? Are there
Yeah.
no poorhouses for Tiny Tim?
Yeah.
For ignorance and want.
It changes so much, that little detail that I learned of like your dad is in prison for being poor, first off, debtor's prison as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Second,
Yeah.
we're going to send the rest of the family to be there too. That changes things so much.
Yeah.
And
And what was the understanding that Charles Dickens was working in the boot factory as a way to like help pay off the debt?
yeah,
So
yeah, he was earning
the
money.
entire, yeah, yeah, the entire debt of the family of the father has now
Mhm.
transferred to him, and now he is responsible for it.
And he's 12. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like you're not only keeping Bob Cratchit from having a good
Mhm.
life, but you are putting his whole thing. It's like this generational like
Yeah.
debt that you might not be able to pay off. And
Mhm.
whenever he gets visited by Christmas to come, I think it is, there's that little scene in the house with the two people that we don't see and that we never see again, but with the two people that this guy comes home and his wife is like, hey, do we have good news or bad news? And the husband is like, yeah, well, Scrooge is dead. And now we have hope that maybe whoever's in charge of our debt next might be a generous person, or might be,
Yeah.
like they felt incredible hope
Hmm.
at maybe someone will fix this, make the burden
Yeah.
easier to bear.
Is that the same scene where they're kind of laughing and describing with his nephew, or is that separate?
It's a different scene because with the nephew and with the game, that was what,
Hmm.
Christmas present.
Right, because
And then
they're contemporaries, right?
that's a different ghost visitation.
Mm.
Yeah, there's like the part where they're selling his bedclothes.
Right. That was
I think it's
really
like
moving to me. Yeah.
yeah, you're trying to accumulate all this stuff, which to be fair, Scrooge kind of isn't. Scrooge is,
Hmm.
he's not living in excess. He's just holding it
Right.
all. He's not
Yeah.
spending his money. He's living
No.
in a place that he rents out the rooms of Jacob Marley's old house, and he just lives
Yeah.
in this little bitty tiny room. He doesn't even afford himself these excesses, which once
He doesn't
again
even
is
turn on the light. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Which is another big difference from our
Hmm.
CEOs today. He wants to lord his meanness over everyone.
Hmm.
He wants to lord that power over them, but he's not lording his money over them because he's not even spending it on
Yeah.
himself. He's just hoarding it and just keeping it and just letting it grow, Scrooge McDuck, until he can swim in it.
Yeah. Which is interesting, as in comparison to sort of contemporary CEOs, because I think today it feels like there's no, I mean, you'll see infographics and stuff of like there is no way to really possibly ever spend the incredible wealth that you have accumulated. Where with Scrooge, it is this, and maybe this is like knowing about Dickens's past, maybe I don't know what it is, but there is this sense, and there was that quote I pulled from earlier of like you're trying to protect against something. Like this is not coming from greed, it's coming from fear. And I think that is like
Mm,
such a thing I've been thinking of this month, and I feel like maybe this is sort of concurrent with a lot of Christmases sometimes of like money, I think, is most effective when it is tied to fear. And that
mm,
money is like the greatest way to find security in the world we live in, right? I think that's yeah, I feel like that's the big difference. It's not about gold and guilt, it's a guild, but about fear and protection.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing of like are you familiar with The Giver at all? The Lois Lowry
Yeah.
novel.
Mm-hmm.
So and our episode on that came out 2 days ago. And my guest had such a wonderful question of that book is all about a character giving memories to a young boy, to a 12-year-old. And my guest asked like what would you give if you were the giver? What memory would you give? And I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think like what are the most effective emotions to change people's mind? And I feel like fear is a big one. That's how sort of Scrooge gets jolted into this is fear of
Yeah.
the unknown. And then it starts, but then it's also this person that I think he really, like we've been talking about, really valued and saw a lot in and respected. Yeah.
Yeah. I think fear, if used, that's the thing, right?
Hmm.
If you have the power to put fear into people, and of course, I'm thinking about my religious trauma. Hello, it's
Yeah.
always here. It can be used for good or it can be used for evil. The fear of this is what could happen if you continue on in this way.
Hmm.
In this case, it's being used for good. But
Yeah.
where it becomes gross is when people are like using it to gaslight you into using the fear to do evil things. But then it's like, who gets to decide
Yeah.
what's good and evil? Like whatever. But yeah, I totally agree with you that it's the
Hmm.
fear of, oh no, if I don't change this, this could happen. Or it's the fear
Hmm.
of, oh no, if I don't do this, this, and this, I'm gonna burn in hell or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? And that's something that I only just like while we've been talking about it, realized that it isn't, it's a withholding of his wealth when that wealth can be used to do like active good.
Yeah.
And it's bonus that it makes him feel great. He's so excited once he's had his change of heart and he realizes that he has like a do-over. It's freeing to him that he can just like
Hmm.
toss it around in ways that can do him good and can do other people good.
Yeah.
And it's bonus that it does him good and that it feels good instead of just holding it all and waiting for, I mean, I don't know, whatever he's waiting for. Yeah. So no wonder people who have adapted this story have wanted to like flesh out
Yeah.
those parts of his psyche. Because I mean, fear is an extremely powerful, it's a very, very, very powerful thing.
Yeah.
It can be a very motivating force. But then the question is, who's using it for good, who's using it for not good,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there's such I don't have the exact line in my head, but there's such a relief when he's like, these are things that can be changed. This doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be the way it ends up.
Yeah, and he asks that of whichever ghost it is,
Hmm.
but he's like, is this like for sure,
Yeah.
or can these things be changed? Like,
Yeah.
are these things variable upon different choices being made? Because I think that's really where he takes responsibility for, okay, I see that this situation, this little scene that I popped into, like I could do something about that. This little scene that I popped into, I could do something about that. I think it's significant that like ignorance and want are the names of the
Hmm.
children too, because it's if all you're thinking about is building your own little empire and you're not thinking about the life that's being lived around you by people who are unlike you or people who are like you. But if you're never like thinking about what's happening that isn't just you centric, if you're ignorant to those things, then yeah, you have no choice
Hmm.
but to keep it all for
Yeah.
yourself. But like you have the power to enact change. Like you have the means, the resources to be able to enact change. So if you have those resources to be able to enact change,
Yeah, that revelation of the ability to change things is comes as such a relief, I think. I think that's really powerful. I'm looking at they're still with the first ghost. He shows Dickens, not Dickens, oof, Scrooge and his fiance, and then shows her later life. And she's surrounded by children, and it's this beautiful, bustling, sort of picturesque family. The narrator, what's surprising is that they're describing it, and then the narrator starts to put himself in again. To be I and I and I. He goes, I should have liked, I do confess, to have the lightest license of a child and yet to have been man enough to know its value. As an adult, isn't that sort of your job in Christmas, is to hold those two things at the same time and kind of be both?
yeah, it's really like I just got goosebumps. It's really, really, really effective. Also, reading this book got me really wondering about. I promise I'll get back to what we were talking about. But
All good.
we watch a lot of Great British Baking Show, and
Hmm.
specifically, we love the holiday episodes. They're wonderful. They're so great because oftentimes they bring back bakers from
Oh,
other seasons that you've seen. And then oftentimes, have you seen any of those holiday episodes? Are you a Great British Baking Show girly?
yes, I haven't been for many years, but I don't think I have seen a holiday one, but I'm familiar
Yeah,
with the show in general.
the holiday ones are really fun because they bring back, so they'll have a Christmas episode and then a New Year's episode, basically.
Mm.
So you'll see like season one, two, three, whatever, of the Great British Baking Show holidays. And each of those seasons has two episodes. So one is usually Christmas themed, and then the next one is usually New Year's Eve themed. And the format they were following for a while was that one of those episodes would be from like past bakers that
Mm.
they would bring back into the tent, and then they would like compete for Star Baker. They would just have
Mm.
three challenges. They do a signature, a technical, and then a showstopper. So it's just one episode, and then they choose like a Star Baker from there. So this person wins from one episode. Then the New Year's episode, or whichever the other one is, they would do like celebrities. They'd have celebrities. So like one of the
Mm.
episodes of this is like the cast of Dairy Girls.
Right,
So
I've
like
seen those
Siobhan
clips. Yeah.
McSweeney, yeah, is on it, and it's just so fun because oftentimes these like celebrities like don't know what they're doing at
Right.
all. So some of the most famous Channel 4 actors or presenters are competing and they just do not know what they're doing, and it's really fun because it's like Paul Hollywood's just like, hey, you've never baked a cake in your life. Like this one woman is like,
Yeah.
I've never used a stand mixer. Here's a stand mixer. I've never baked a cake in my life. It's fun. The stakes are lower. It's like super fun. But every time we watch that, I'm so curious about the relationship between people and Christmas in Great
Mm.
Britain, because it does seem like it, and we talked about this like kind of at the beginning. And I don't know that I know enough about like America's relationship with
Mm.
Christmas other than the way that the Christians try to like lord it over people. But that doesn't seem, from the one little example that I have just of like
Yeah.
the Great British Show holiday episodes, it doesn't seem like that's as much of a what's what I'm looking for, like a polarizing thing.
Corollary? Yeah.
Polarizing, yeah. But also like welcome to America, where we're gonna find divides where
Yeah.
there are divides, and we're gonna make divides where there aren't them. But I think about that a lot because it's like I feel like a lot of people who compete on this Great British Baking Show, I don't know anything about their like religious beliefs.
Yeah.
um
Hmm.
but over here it's kind of like it's either one or it's not. And over
Yes.
there it just seems like it's just all joyful and all great and all wonderful. From those things, it doesn't seem like they're
Right.
using it to exclude anything, right? It doesn't seem like it's they're doing it to exclude anything. But yeah, so that's another thing I've been thinking about a lot. With, this is like a British book by a British person about British people, and but also like they're all going to church and they're all like doing these
Yeah.
things. But it seems like the reason for the season, if you will,
Hmm.
is so much more about joy and generosity and family and
Yeah.
spending time with people. Like that seems to be the most important thing, is that your most important resource is your time. And
Yeah.
that Scrooge, after he's a changed man, does accept that invitation to go to Fred's,
Yeah.
um, much to Fred's wife's horror. But he goes and he like opens himself up to that experience because it's all
Yeah.
about like experiences. Like it seems to be, how can we experience ourselves and each other in a way that is uplifting and is joyful and is just appreciating what we do have, because it's going to look different for
Mhm.
every family. Like the goose, the tiny Christmas goose that they
Mhm.
go on and on
Right.
about, and then the giant Christmas turkey that they go on and on about. Like each man according to his means. But it's like, it's, if you're not in that mindset of this is about togetherness, really, it's
Yeah.
the most important thing that we could do. And if all you're doing is just living your life alone and
Mhm.
saying that's enough, like there's so much more that can open up for you once you accept that doing it alone is one way you can do it. And by it, I mean capital L life,
Mhm.
but that it's much richer and it's much more joyful when it's shared.
Yeah, I'm looking at that scene when he comes into Fred's party. They're sort of reveling in this, and it says wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. And that
Mm.
unanimity, that really struck me. And then immediately after that scene is the next morning, Bob Cratchit comes into work, and Scrooge, this just bothered me, but Scrooge growls hello, quote, in his accustomed voice as near as he could feign it. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day? I'm like, I know it's just for a second and then you're going to say gotcha. But this
Mm-hmm.
poor man already has so much that he's dealing with. I don't like when
Mm-hmm.
people do
Yeah,
that, but
I know. I'll allow it. It's just so the payoff can be that much sweeter. But the payoff is not
mhm.
sweet for Bob Cratchit in that moment. Like he doesn't know about the
No.
payoff. All he knows is I'm about to get fired and lose everything. And you don't need to have that
Yeah.
moment. You don't need to give him that moment just so you can
Mm-mm.
have a nice, fun reversal. And I will say that most film adaptations do lean into that. The versions where Scrooge himself brings the turkey over to the Cratchit's house and has Christmas dinner with
Right.
them. Because that's a part of the adaptation that I'm very familiar with. Like I've seen that in multiple
Mhm.
adaptations. Whereas in the book, it's a little bit different. But time works a little different in the book too. Like I was also really struck
Mhm.
by the way that like time with actually the ghosts visit him over the course of 3 nights, but he
Mhm.
sleeps all day through the thing, and then time doesn't, and then it goes back into anyway. But yeah, he does, like he shows up at the Cratchit's house, and I'm trying to think of exactly the adaptation that I'm thinking of. I think that they do it in Mickey's, where Scrooge McDuck shows up at the Cratchit's house on Christmas Day, at the dinner that he has seen previously. And he's like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be at the office working." And Bob Cratchit's like, "Wait, you gave me the day off." And he's like,
Yeah.
I'll give you some days off," and makes it seem like he's gonna fire him. And then he's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, is it?" And here's a turkey, and then here's this, and then you get a car and you get a turkey, and like whatever it is. He knows he's doing it for a bit, but
Yeah.
it does always make me feel, oh, poor Bob.
Yeah.
This man is like moments away from like a heart attack because of the amount of
Yeah.
stress that he's under. He's
Oh my
moments
gosh.
away from not being able to hold it all together, because it does seem like he feels the pressure of needing to
Oh
be the
yeah.
one that is like leading the family. And
Hmm.
when they are having their dinner with the Christmas goose, and he's like, a toast to Scrooge. He really wants to drink a toast to Scrooge. And it's like Lot's wife in the Bible that's just like, hey, like God is doing all these horrible things to you, curse God and die. Like he's doing all of these horrible things to you, and Scrooge is doing all these horrible things to you, says Mrs. Cratchit. And Bob is like, he's the reason we have any of this, so we need to acknowledge him. And she is like, she's bah humbug herself about it.
Yeah.
Understandably so. So it's like he's under this enormous pressure. And I think that Cole as an image is very interesting. But he
Mm.
really is under like this enormous amount of pressure to be the positive one, to be the one that's like hopeful and optimistic about Tiny Tim. And a lot of that might be because he himself is an optimistic person, but he
Right.
has to feel that weight of all those things. And so it's like, I get that it's like the last thing cruel that Scrooge does to him, but still,
Yeah.
we could have skipped it. This poor guy. In a different
I
version of the book
know.
of the story, he just like falls down dead. It's like that was it. That was the
Yeah.
straw that broke Bob Cratchit's back.
And I think in the differences between the adaptations and stuff, I think the like genuinely the most horrifying moment is in the Ghost of Christmas Future. You go to the Cratchit's house and they have dead Tiny Tim laid up upstairs, and we
Yes.
like visit his corpse and then still try
And
to
Bob
like have
Cratchit
a
gives him a
merry
kiss.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in the Mickey version, Bob is late because he's gone to visit his grave. He
Mhm.
lays his crutch on the grave in something that just like breaks your
Oh.
heart. Yeah. So sad.
Oh. Yeah.
So sad. But no, like definitely horrifying. Like audiences might not understand that this is what they did in the Victorian era, that like the deceased
Yeah.
person is in the home, is in a home. Yeah, so I think that that's something that's kind of like lost in translation from period to period, because also in most of the adaptations I've seen, there's like the grave that the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come
Hmm.
shows him his own grave at the very end. But in the book, the ghost does that at the end of his visit, but he also shows him his own body laid up on a slab all by itself.
Yeah.
So I think that with Tiny Tim being in his own home surrounded by his
Hmm.
people, as like a
Yeah.
little bit of a parallel. But no,
That's true.
that's creepy, ghostly bodies kept in houses.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, but
and
I really like
too,
that parallel you point out. Yeah.
that like Scrooge is all alone and Tiny Tim is
Yeah.
surrounded by people who love him. But oh, just another little like period thing that if people didn't understand how things were done in the Victorian period,
Hmm.
um, that I was reading it and I was like, oh yeah, they have to take their meals to a place to have them cooked, and then
Mm.
get them delivered to their homes or have them picked up, because not everyone has
Yeah.
an oven in their house. Something that we like take for granted. They like have to take their meals and get them cooked and then bring them back. But they do have their little fireplace where they can do their mulled wine and their soup, or the punch that Bob Cratchit makes
Yeah.
with gin and something else that then the children drink.
Mm.
Things were different in the Victorian era, but I think that that's like some good world building too.
Yeah.
That Charles Dickens is able to do even in such a short book. Build that world. It is such a short world. I mean, a short book, and I'm glad.
And
Listen, whenever you
effective.
first
Hmm.
were like, yeah, very effective. You first were like, hey,
Yeah.
let's do a Christmas Carol, and my brain went to what we were talking about earlier, which is, oh no, it's Charles Dickens. I don't know if I have time to read this. I'm so glad that we read this. Like I'm so
Yeah.
glad that now I'm much more familiar with the source material because of the amount of adaptations that do this way and do that way. It is always like really good to kind of go back to the original, and to like to see the things that are different and how it might change meaning or how it might change
Mm.
understanding. So I mean, I think that I'm not gonna preempt your
No,
question
I
that you
feel
always
like
ask.
it's come to time to.
I really enjoyed reading it a lot.
Yeah, I thought it was really sweet. I think I might still value, I feel like for me, maybe as an audience member, I think it maybe works better not as a book, like as a film or as a play. I feel like maybe there's just something there that I think like putting it in the hands of actors and performers, they get to, I think, fill in those gaps of some of the
Hmm.
backstory and some of the relationship, and those interpretations can sort of flesh it out a little bit and make it a little more whole for me.
Definitely. And I think what we're talking about, the reason why he changes is not only because he chooses to change, he chooses to see things, and the things that he sees are human people.
Yeah.
who don't have the resources that he has, and he himself has to like consider what would it be like to put myself in these people's shoes. And
Yeah.
that's what the storytelling media of film and of theater do very best. So I'm 100% inclined to agree with you that
Yeah.
that's the whole reason why it's so effective, is because he sees it happening to people, and we see it
Right.
happening to people whenever we're watching it on a screen versus the pictures that we're making up in our heads. Yeah,
I'm totally.
it's the humanity. It's the seeing the human story being told by real human people who are like right in front of us, either on screen or on stage. It forces us
Yeah.
to like look in that mirror, into that mirror that theater holds up to life. But yeah, I totally agree with you there.
Yeah. But still, yeah, required reading, required seasoning. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's required reading for sure. And it's
Yeah,
so short. Yeah, you could read it out loud to
exactly. I really like
your
that.
dogs, your
Mhm.
spouse, your family, and it makes it feel not as far away. Yeah, I think everyone should read it. Just like
Mhm.
take a
Yeah,
little evening and give it a little read.
yeah. But I guess I'll close on the final line. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like
Yeah.
to plug?
I'm leaving X, obviously, so I'm not
Yeah.
on Blue Sky yet. I will be. But I mean, yeah, follow me on Instagram if you want to see theater content and dog content and gay content. I mean, not like gay content,
Wife
like
content.
yeah,
Here's my
wife
wife.
content. Here she is being cute, and then occasionally things for work. And my Instagram is at Prof Carly O'Brien. Follow if you want, don't if you don't. Live your life, and may we bless us, everyone. May
Mm.
we bless ourselves and bless each other in this season of perpetual hope, as Catherine O'Hara's character says. And
We'll end it there. Perfect.